More than a century ago, everyday life in and around Malvern was captured onto glass. Moments of people, places and everyday scenes carefully recorded in a way that never meant to last this long. Over time, many of these images were forgotten, stored away, unseen for decades. Hi, I'm Colton Halls, and recently I had the opportunity to give a talk for the Malvern Civic Society about a remarkable collection of historic glass negatives. These images show life in and around Malvern from mid-19th century into the early 20th century. Families, streets, workplaces and everyday moments that would have otherwise have been lost. Interestingly, I recently came across some original glass negatives myself. Some even the same size as those held at the museum. When you hold them up to the light, you realise these aren't just photographs. They're physical pieces of history. What you're about to see is a film version of that talk, along with some of the story behind it. It's quite a long video, but I'm trying to condense a 40-minute talk into something a tiny bit shorter, but we'll see how it goes. These are not polished souvenir views of Malvern. They are glass negatives, fragile, sharp and surprisingly intimate. Made of exposures of roughly a second, they show a lived-in town, with family groups, shop fronts, working lives and everyday moments that were never meant to become history, and yet now feel more alive because they did. The story began next door to Malvern Museum. Whilst I was working at First Page Printers, I was handed boxes of old glass negatives that had not properly been brought into the light for decades. Inside were hundreds of forgotten photographs of Malvern life from more than a century ago. That moment set everything in motion. It led to Malvern Memories with Martin and Wendy MacDonald plus myself on Facebook, and eventually to this project. And I should also say this work was helped along by Faith Renger, Cora Weaver, Brian Isles and Paul Ferris, whose research added so much along the way. At the centre of this collection are two men. John Need, a pharmaceutical chemist and an amateur photographer, and Dr. Stanley Haynes, a general practitioner and vice president of the Malvern Camera Club. Both are reflected in the archive, but John Need was the main photographer, and many of the images you will see were taken by him. This is one of the few images of John Need himself. That feels fitting somehow, because photographers are so often the hidden presence in an archive. But here, at least briefly, we get to meet the man behind so much of the collection. If John Need was central to making many of these images, Dr. Stanley Haynes was central to their survival. He was one of Need's closest friends and at the time lived at Medhurst, 143 Worcester Road. After Need's death, the glass negatives passed into his care. Then after Dr. Haynes died, his wife Caroline made sure they were passed on to Malvern Library, then later on to Malvern Museum. Without that chain of care, these images might easily have been lost. Here we see John Need outside Ligon Pharmacy, where he worked and lived. It is easy to imagine that this is not just his shop and home, but also part of his photographic world, perhaps even the place where some of his developing was done. Now we see the pharmacy as part of a wider public moment. A small group stands outside, linked up during the coronation of George V in 1911. It is a local scene, but one tied to a national event. Here, the shopfront itself becomes the subject. The windows, the display, the frontage, all the public details of the place are still visible today. It gives us a clearer sense of how the pharmacy presented itself to the street and how familiar it must have once been for the people passing by. And if you look closely, you can still make out words behind the glass frame. that has since been painted over in white, and I believe the original lettering may still survive underneath. From the public face of the pharmacy, we move into the family behind it. Here we are introduced to the household as individuals. Emma Need, John's mother, along with Edith, Elise, May, Lawrence, Mrs. Silman the housekeeper, and even the dog, who seems a little unsure about the whole business. And here they are as a group, a household portrait, but not an overly stiff one. There is still sense of life in it. One woman in the white top remains unidentified, and Lawrence, also known as Jack, seems more interested in the dog than sitting properly for the camera. That is part of what makes the image so engaging. It is formal enough to preserve the family, but loose enough to let their personalities show through. This feels a little more relaxed. The watches pinned on the ladies' tops are a lovely detail, and once again Lawrence is looking away from the camera, as though he is never quite willing to give his full attention. It feels less like a formal portrait and more like a family moment caught in the passing on a break time from the chemist. I really like this one. It's slightly blurred, but there is something magical about it. Rabbits, a dog, a cat, and a household scene that feels less arranged and more natural. Not perfect, but full of life, and sometimes that is even better. Here we have Edith and Mrs. Silman, dressed in their Sunday best. It is a simple image, but it says a lot about presentation, pride, and the importance of clothing in marking out a special occasion. At this point, I want to widen out a little. Not all the next images were taken by John Need, but they were included in the same box of negatives, which shows how varied the collection really is. So from here we move from the Need family into earlier views of Malvern itself. The Bellevue Hotel lettering on the wall has since moved slightly to the left, and the grand entrance you see here is now the entrance to the Masonic Hall and apartments. That is one of the pleasures of these photographs. They let you see places we still know, but in an earlier form. This is the Beecham Hotel. It is believed to be dated from just before 1856, and the clue is the name on the door, Emma Fielders. Mr. Fielders had died and his wife opened the hotel shortly after. So that small detail helped place the image in time. And yes, it is impossible not to notice the dog. Even in one of Malvern's oldest photographs, a dog still manages to steal a little bit of attention. Another early image taken by John Gooch in 1856. It shows the Worcester Road stables. The important detail is the wall on the right-hand side. That becomes useful in the next comparison, where you can still trace part of that earlier structure in the present-day view. It is one of the earliest known photographs in Malvern, other than the one I showed you before, and that alone gives it real significance. And here is the scene now. You can still see the connecting wall of the building on the right, which helps link the old photograph directly to the modern view. Now we come to Bellevue Terrace. It is one of those places that may have seemed ordinary at the time, but now feels full of value because it was photographed. Streets like this are never just buildings. They are the backdrop to daily life, trade, movement and routine. And if you look more closely here, there is plenty to notice. Damage in the centre, a cart, and once again a dog. Small details, but they keep the image grounded in real life rather than turning it into a tidy historical postcard. This is a photograph of the entrance of Malvern Priory in 1882 and is linked to a marriage, a moment of ceremony, family and transition held in place by the camera. This is Rosebank Gardens, and you can still make out the Mount Pleasant Hotel lettering along with the details of the villa above. Its demolition in 1959 helped lead the formation of Malvern Civic Society in response to the loss of such a landmark. So this image is not just showing us a place, it is showing us something people later realised they could not afford to lose again. These early views give us the setting, but the story does not end here. In the next episode, the collection opens out into family life, public gatherings, and the everyday world of the town.